good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining the talk. I'm kind of hoping this will be a little bit more of a light talk and some fun, and we'll get a bit of interaction going as well. I also have made the fatal mistake of trying to do a demo, so if it goes badly, we'll put it down to it being a Friday afternoon as well. So my name is Anton Morrison. I have been designing user experiences for 25 years, actually probably more than that now. It's actually my birthday today. So if you can bring the cake in now. So I don't know if it's because of my birthday, but I kind of changed this talk at the last minute a little bit just because I want to talk about the future, and I've been doing this a long time. But I think sometimes when you talk about the future, it's good to just maybe see how we got to the point that we got to. So it might be a little bit nostalgic, but I want to just go through a little bit of my career and how the web has changed in that sense. So over 25 years ago, I studied computing science at this lovely university called Glasgow University. The university is way older than Canada, and even older than Quebec, believe it or not. To this day, I believe that there was people in the first day of the first year that knew more about computing science than I did at the last day of the fourth year. But I got through it and I really enjoyed it. Coming out, living in Glasgow at that time, Motorola had a massive software. Basically it was a software factory, and 90% of the people that studied computing science went and got a job at Motorola. And this is when Motorola phones were actually good, and it was a company that you'd want to work for. I didn't. I kind of came out of, I should have been a software engineer, but I kind of came out of it not loving programming in a sense. You know, I wasn't a hardcore software engineer, and I met a friend who had a design company, and they were a very brand heavy design company. They had great clients. One of their clients was a band called Simple Minds. And they also had like some of the best football teams in Scotland, and they had just started to evolve into technology and web. And this is like late 90s, early 2000s, late 90s. And my friend and I were sitting having a beer, and he's like, "Hey, you're a programmer, come and work for me. We need people to build websites. Do you know PHP?" I obviously didn't, but I said, "Well, how hard can it be? I've just learned, Java for 4 years, and I've just learned been using C++. So I went and worked with them. I was in that beautiful office in the West End of Glasgow, an amazing big Victorian house, and you walk through it, and there was all these lovely tables, and there was like MacBooks, and there was things on the wall. It was just this amazing design studio. And then they took me through to where the programmers were, and it was like no windows, PCs, just get stuff done. And that was the time when it was totalitarian to the designer. It was like pixel perfect. I want rounded corners. I want this gradient. That rollover's not right, and it was hard. It was hard. Like we literally used to cut out corners of every button to do a rollover for a rounded corner, and then the designer would go, "I've changed my mind, I want to change the colour," and you would literally have to go and cut all of those corners out again. So it was not fun. This is where I think the web is actually it's my favourite technology. If you think the first website that was built in 1989 by good old Tim, I looked at that this morning, it still works. Right? It still works in a browser, right? You can still read that website, you still know what they were saying. I think the success story of the web is HTML. It's changed and evolved, but what other technologies back compatible with that amount of years when you think about it? So there's something going right there. At the same time as I was working at that agency, and you were under the cautious, we would say, to get those rounded buttons in. Jeffrey Zellman wrote this book about web standards, and there was a couple of developers in the organisation who were like, "We need to do these web standards, this is the future, we need to start, separating our content from our design." And the designers didn't care. They were like, I want it exactly the same on every browser, exactly the same for everybody that comes there. I'm used to printing things, I want print on the screen. And I looked back, and I remember building this website in 2005, and this was the one that me and my friend were like, fuck it, we're going to use web standards to build this, we're going to do it properly. I looked at the code this morning, so I looked on the way back, I looked at the code, I obviously didn't. I still use tables, I still heights on table widths and all that. You can see how hard that was to maintain and trying to design it. And thankfully, we got better at it. But I think the promise of CSS fell for me, right? And I've got a few slides that I kind of take you through this. This idea that structures on this side, presentations on this side. Back in 2004, 2005, I was like, I'll never need to write HTML again. Once it's done, that's it done, and we'll do a redesign of our website, and we'll just change the CSS, and it'll be amazing, and our jobs will be easier, and we'll be able to take Fridays off, and all the rest of things. Zen Garden. Does anybody know about Zen Garden? Right. This was like, now I'm showing my age, right? This was like TikTok for us. This was like literally every morning I'd go on, I'd be like, what's next? Like, oh, this is amazing. We were doing them, and I was like, this is like, the future's bright, But I don't know if, in my experience, and I'm just being honest here, I don't think I've ever taken on a project that's a redesign where we've not changed the HTML. Right? I just think that the way that it's happened is there's this, and that's a picture of Scotland, because everybody thinks Scotland's great until you live there, so this is, there's a reality that, the presentation and the structure is intertwined to a certain extent that idea just never ever became reality. Now, there's better versions of it than not, but I think, if I'm honest with myself looking at the career, there was never a website we took on as a redesign and went, oh, we don't need to touch the structure, we don't need to touch the HTML. Another big thing that was happening around that time was, and I always bring this book up, was mobiles. We were starting to use Motorola mobiles, and this guy Cameron Moe, I don't know if you know him, but he's a smart guy. He wrote one of the first books about designing for mobiles. And it's like, here's how to use your stylus, and here's how to use a keyboard. The same, literally, I checked this morning, it was a month after he published that book that Steve Jobs went, here's the iPhone. And that kind of changed everything. That was like, what the F is going on here? We all were just like mind blown by this. A browser on the phone, it changed everything. But it didn't change everything for the better for a long time because of this. Like there was years where I was really proud of the work that you would do, and you're like, look at how efficient that is, look at how many lines of CSS I've used and all that, and then it would be like, client uses IE, change it, the client's got IE 6, and then IE 7's come out and go like, yes, this is it, and it was worse, because it was nearly right, so it wasn't even like, it was hard, and responsive design came about, which changed everything. But I think if I look at it, one of the things that came out of this kind of scene was kind of frameworks, right? This idea that you could start to reuse people's HTML and CSS, and it would be robust in lots of browsers, and you'd be like, okay, cool, now I can reuse. This is the bootstrap colours, I'm sure you're aware of it. We use foundation, and we're like, this is amazing, we can use this. And as soon as you have to change it for something, it becomes a bit of a 80-20 rule, where you get 80% of the site done, and then the last 20% is 80% more of the time. But then this led to problems as well, and there was a famous tweet, it's like, which one of these two websites are you designing at the moment? And we kind of got to this, what I kind of call the sea of sameness. It was restricted by the developers in a sense. So the power struggle between design and development kind of went from the totalitarian days of designers saying it must be pixel perfect, to then a certain level of developers saying you can't do that because it doesn't fit in with the framework. You can't do that because it's going to be too much. And you know, there's always balances and there's always difference within the projects. But ultimately, these frameworks kind of led to this kind of sea of sameness and of sites. Does everybody know Jacob's law of UX?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's like, he's a bit of a dick. It's most people look at other people's websites, so don't make your website different, right? So like most people know where the navigation is, where the header is, where the logo is, and it makes sense to a certain extent. But I think there's a time where we need to kind of escape from that and maybe just bring a bit of kind of design back to the web, and it's also just pretty boring. If everybody had the same website, you know, like where would the joy and the experience be in that? And now we've kind of gone, and I don't use Tailwinds, and I've put this in here as an interesting, like I'd love to know if any of you use Tailwind, or any of you like have got experience with it. But this way that we've went from HTML and CSS being separate to now we've got HTML with CSS and the elements that are just about moving the element. It feels like what I showed you in 2005 with tables with sizes and that. And it's like, are we kind of, I mean, so a question for this room, does anybody use Tailwinds? Does anybody know about it? Is it a valuable, what is it good for in terms of your workflow?
It's really good for rapid prototyping.
Mm.
And I like that it recompiles as you go along, and you know, really good, you know, minimize CSS based on what you're actually using.
Yeah.
Sorry, we can't do that in
He said it's really good for rapid prototyping and it minimises the CSS as you compile it, and you know it's very good for that side of things. I've not used it. It seems such an alien thing, and maybe it's because I'm old that you know, like we went to this, like we're actually adding CSS to elements. But I just put it in there because I'm genuinely interested about how it's used. So that's the history, right? And I apologise if that was a bit reminiscence and a bit nostalgic, but bear with me, it's my birthday. So now let's talk about creative AI, because everybody's talking about it. And again, I'm going to ask you some questions about this as well, because I want to see how you are using it, and we're going to share actual examples of how we're using it. So I actually kind of ripped some of these slides from a presentation I seen the other day because I thought it was really good. You know, like this idea that, you know, artificial intelligence is going to bring productivity. I like the way that this, you know, like showed it as like electricity. You know, some of the things we do with electricity are like one of those, you know, how would we not do that? And I think that's the way we should think of AI. You know, we shouldn't think of it as replacing things, we should think of it as another tool. And it is already kind of doing stuff out there within the creative world, you know, like generating images, creating code. We actually, kind of in an inception kind of way, we created a Figma plugin to use ChatGPT to generate content in a Figma file. And it worked. Kind of went back and forth a few times, but my developer was like, yeah, we got that working. And it was like a couple hours. He had never wrote a Figma plugin before. It's TypeScript, so he knows TypeScript obviously, but it was back and forth. Hey, do you know how to write a plugin? Yep, I know how to write a plugin. This is what I want it to do. Test it. Oh no, it's not working here. I'll fix it. And it was like the old-fashioned paired programming, where someone used to watch you over your shoulder when you were programming. They would go, you missed a bit, or you missed a bit. I used to be better at that one than the actual typer, but that's what it's kind of like. And I'm thinking, you know, is AI that paired programmer, you know, a mad person that you don't really have? So a question for everybody, who thinks in the next 2 years their job will not exist because of AI? Show of hands. It's a very confident room. Okay. I don't think so either, but I think there will be I think you can replace innovator with any word here, creative, software engineer, UX. I think people that don't use it and harness it as part of their workflow and part of their toolkit, they're redundant because the other people are just going to go so much faster or just produce things much better. So I don't think it's going to replace our jobs, hopefully not, especially at my age, because I'll be able to get another one. But I think people that don't use it, don't harness, don't embrace it at this moment in time are going to probably struggle in the future. There's also, I never put a slide in at this because I started reading about it and actually it's much more complicated. There's a study called the productivity paradox, where we think about all these things that are making us faster at working and are actually leading to more things. Like if you look at email, 20, 30 years ago, like when email was starting to come out, we're like, this is amazing, we can talk to each other in real time across multiple continents, this is going to save me so much more time. It doesn't really, because you just do your emails all day. So there's this idea, and there's one of my friends that I was talking to is like, he's convinced that AI is going to ruin everything for 10 years and then we're going to have to fix it. So there's going to be this kind of like eating of the machine that starts learning from itself, and we go down a route where there's going to be a moment in time where we have to fix it. So I'm on the fence with that one, but I think if we don't make it part of our workflows and use it where we can, then we will become obsolete. I do think that it's inevitable that digital products will get cheaper, right? So the idea that I used to work for a large agency and websites would never be less than $500,000. I think there's a big wake-up call for that side of things, and the way that workflows are going and the way that tools are going, which we're going to talk about, I think the cost of digital production is going to be lower, and I think that's something that we should all be thinking about. So where have we used AI? So this is so I have a client visit Korea and they're doing a big event in London, UK at the moment, and we were trying to sell them on this AI itinerary builder, so someone's going to go to this event, it's in an amazing big space in London, and there's going to be lots of pictures of things on the wall, and they'll scan them and they'll like them automatically, then they'll hit a button and that will automatically create an itinerary. The client was really struggling with this and they're like, I can't visualize it. So we created designs using purely AI. So one of my designers went really, you can't really see great there, but went really deep into finding the best images that we needed in the space of a night. We've got like nice smoke and all that, and then we were able to use what we were generating to fit into exactly what our vision was. So we're creating this parallax effects that we would take people through the experience. And that was just to sell the project. Rather than kind of like, this was for a pitch. We probably won't actually do this because it's not real pictures, but we were using AI to generate these images and thinking about the prototype so that we could sell the work. Cool. And then we've also created, so I work a lot in the travel industry and they're all very worried about AI and everything. So we kind of created this prototype, a POC for one of our clients, which is an itinerary builder. And it was just this, let's see if it works. It took us a day to do it. It wasn't, it's not too sophisticated, but when you show it to clients and you show it to people, they're like, oh, that could do this and that could do that. And we're actually extending that for South Korea now to make it only about South Korea, but to really kind of train our own little AI within the app. And it's just this idea of kind of taking what's there and thinking about how we can leverage it. So really simple examples, but showing that they can work and showing that they can't work. It's funny because it does a good job of giving you suggestions, but it does a really bad job of distances. So it will say like, have breakfast in Quebec City and then lunch in Montreal. Like, so you're like, okay, we need to train that a little bit better. So. And obviously I used it to brainstorm this presentation a couple of days ago, where I was just, you know, what could this storyline be, and getting ideas there. This is what I use ChatGPT for more than anything. We do a lot of user testing. We now just use it to kind of create our testing scripts, to create our plans. We've started to analyze testing with it, so we're feeding in author transcripts, and we're getting stuff out of that. We're asking it questions. So I'm seeing it more as, you know, a person in the room, if you will, like a person that you can brainstorm with, a person that you can ask questions with. Come up with competitor analysis. We've got really good prompts where we can go, okay, give us a competitor analysis of co-working spaces in Montreal at the moment, and then give us co-working spaces in New York, and it kind of just generates a really nice output for you to then go, okay, let's look into that more, or let's look into that more. So, you know, as a research tool, I think it's like really helpful. It's obviously got its limitations, and you know, like the amount of time it goes back to look at stuff. I know all that, but still as a thing that you can use to get ideas quickly, it's been really invaluable to us. So a question for you is how are you using AI, ChatGPT, whatever, like in your workflows, in your day-to-day? Like, are you using it to generate code, create code, content?
They're actually currently creating a policy to ensure people are not using ChatGPT.
Oh yeah, nice.
And AI because of IP essentially, right?
Yeah.
For the government. So there's concerns that, I mean, it's one thing to build a PowerPoint deck, but it's another thing to plug in a whole speech or a whole report, and then that information is just everywhere. So there's lots of clear and unknowns. I'm not saying it's the correct move, I'm just saying that's where we're at. There's policies, and pretty much we even told our companies it.
Yeah, nice. I remember there's the example of Samsung a couple of weeks ago, was it a couple of months ago, where someone from Samsung had put in data to ChatGPT to ask it a question, like, you know, generate a graph from this or something, but it was actual people's information.
Yeah.
And then it kind of went into the machine, and then it was like, you know, give me the bank account of John Doe, and it was. So I understand that, but I think that's like an education thing about how you could use it. I also have a friend that's a professor at McGill, and he's like, he had to change his whole course to try and be put together. He teaches PhD students, and he's like, now I need to do everything really recent because ChatGPT doesn't, know anything about the last couple of years. So now all my assignments are about recent cases and recent things that have happened, so that he's had to work around that as well. Anyone else? There's no one. Yep.
I used to with NTG. I used Whisper AWS to write code directly on Azure.
Yeah.
And just by typing a comment on it, and what I want to implement, it's continuing the code.
Nice.
It's apply the productivity.
Yeah.
a lot. And recently, I write a consolidation of contract with my mortgage agent with OpenAI, with ChatGPT.
Is there plugins? Because I don't code anymore, but is there like plugins coming in that, like rather than compile it, it debugs it as you're writing it? Is there things like that anybody's using?
It's generic code, so I just write some comments of what I want to do and generate the code that I need. Yeah. It's pretty good.
Interesting. Well, I think it'll be interesting to see where we go with it. So now let's talk about the second thing that I think is happening. If we think back about what I talked at the start, how we've got to where we've got to, the web is a bit, uninspiring at times. AI is now here to help us be more productive and build more robust products. And I feel as though there's also in the last year, and it was one of the reasons that I left my previous job and set up a small agency, that the visual development tools have really hit a place where they could be used for production work. Does anybody know Andy Clark? Does anybody know? This is an English designer. I really like Andy Clark. He's always talked a lot about, you know, the essence of design in the web, and he's got a series which I really recommend people kind of go and read to see what the web could be, on Smashing Magazines, where he takes artists of the past, magazines, and he kind of creates, you know, different experiences that really bring the web to life. And he has this idea where, like, you know, art direction gives substance to design, and art direction adds humanity to design. And I think what I was trying to get at the start is sometimes we've got a little bit mechanical with our design, and I feel as though, and I may have sounded like a grumpy old man at the start, now I'm an optimist, that going into the future now, we can start to bring a little bit of magic back to the design of websites. So the tool that we have kind of focused on a lot in the last year as I've been setting up my agency is Webflow. Does everybody know about Webflow, or has anybody kind of like heard of it? It's got limitations that we're going to come on to, but in terms of allowing my designers to get in there with the design in the browser, it's really powerful. You know, they can now start to agonize over the design while it's getting produced, rather than passing it down the line for interpretation of that design. So I still don't know if it's a tool for designers that want to code or coders that like to design. It's kind of in between, but at the moment I have a designer in Vancouver who's just loving it, because he's like, I feel as though I can control my own design now. I feel as though I don't have to have this hard line of, it's signed off, don't ask me to change it. He can kind of tweak it in the browser much easier, and he's not in any way, shape or form a coder. Another, and I'm going to go into a demo of this in a second, another really thing that's come out recently is this Figma to Webflow. And I'll give you a demo of it. Obviously technology demos and presentations aren't great, but we'll see if it works. But this has been a bit of a game changer for us. So if I go into Webflow and I just create a new site, right, so this is Webflow here. So down the left hand side you have like your pages. It's like a design tool. You know, you have your pages, you can add components to your pages, you have different layouts, you have different things within there, they're all pre-created. You can also add your own components and things, and then you have layers. And then if I add something like a list here, on the right hand side it's pretty much the inspector. So you know how you inspect a browser? Down the right hand side is like where you can control that. There's lots of templates and all that. We'll come on to the issues a little bit in a second, but this idea of Figma to Webflow is what I want to try and show you today. So if I go to here, can you see that okay? So we have these kind of like basic components that we've already created, and then I've got a page here, so we can stick a navigation in here. We can put some elements in here. We can like change the background colors. Let's change it to something red. We can add this in here, pricing table. Oh. And then we have a page, right? We can add images to this. So then we have a plugin which is called Figma to Webflow. So if I run this and I just select the full page, and then if I select my website that I just created, and I just click copy, and then if I go over to Webflow, and if I delete this, and I go to the body, and I paste, there we go. Let me just delete this one for knew this wouldn't work, eh? Must be doing something now, it's taking longer. There we go, green's good. And then you paste it in here. And then if I publish this website, you can see that you've got actual HTML, CSS in the space of seconds. So when you talk about rapid prototyping, you know, this for us has been insane because we were able to get early prototypes into browsers and user test them with actual users, because we used to do a lot of user testing with Figma, but there's always a limitation with the prototype in Figma. There's always that error of margin you have to take off at any results because you know that they're clicking about a picture of a website rather than a real website. And you know, you can go back and change colours and it takes it over, and we've used it a lot for prototyping. We're starting to use it for production sites, and we're starting to use it actually copying over a style guide first. So just actually copying over components and doing it, you know, like the Lego bricks, rather than doing the full pages. So again, just in terms of speed and delivery of prototyping and first version websites, start testing and show clients, it's been invaluable for us. So I'll go back and, but there's lots of limitations with Webflow. Like, it's not brilliant, right? There's a lot of people that obviously don't quite know how to name class names and don't really know how to do hierarchy, things like that. So taking over a project from people, like the collaboration sucks. It just doesn't exist. Like, you can only have one person in the platform at a time. You kind of pass it over to people. There's no, you know, like when you look at a CSS file or there's sometimes like, you know, commentary, you know, like there's sometimes comments, not always, but hey, I'm doing this for this. You don't really have comments in Webflow, so it's hard to kind of collaborate. As I say, we've kind of been working more on a base design system for Webflow that all of our team are using, so there is a commonality, but at the moment it's a bit of the Wild West. Like, you know, if you are taking on a Webflow project, never buy a template or anything, because it's just going to be impossible to use after you try and change it, which is usually the case. There's also a limit on the CMS. The CMS is pretty good, but there's a limit on the amount of items you can have in the CMS, which really kind of, you know, drastically reduces the ability to use it for enterprise. But there is, you know, like, I don't think you should throw the baby out with the bathwater. If you look at the amount of investment that Webflow have got, and they're putting a lot of effort into the community and to drive that and to kind of like listen to people, I don't think it's going anywhere. I really do feel as though it's the best tool there, and if it can be part of a workflow, then it should be considered. We are taking it to the max where, so this is one of my clients, One World Alliance. So with their 14 airlines around the world, American Airlines, British Airways, Fiji, Qatar, we are building them a onboarding training app, a training website for all of the member airlines to use. So we've developed it all in Webflow. I challenged my team, I was like, let's see how far we can get before we need to move it. We're using a low-code database called Xano, which is plugging into the back end now. And in a month's time, 1 million thumbs are going to be on this work, because all of the employees of all of the member airlines have to take this training. It only takes 40 minutes. It's just like, hey, one role does this, one role does that, and we tried to make it fun with, you know, cards, and we've coined this idea of TikTok learning. Interestingly, there's some custom code in there that we got ChatGPT to write for us as we were doing it, just to get the animations perfect. But you just paste it into Webflow, and it was, you know, done in the space of weeks as we were experimenting with the design and seeing what the content was like. So it's really kind of taken our process away from being such a waterfall process to being more designers and developers working completely together on ideas at the same time. You can also export code, and it's pretty good. The only thing that I think you can't export per page, you export the whole site, so then you kind of got a bit too much to kind of sift through. But I'm sure with some intelligent, you know, scripts of your own, you could probably kind of sort that out. But the last thing I kind of wanted to show you is, and I'll just actually play the video, is this idea of DevLink. So it's in beta just now. I have a version of it. I was playing around with it the other day, and I've talked to the kind of the Webflow lab team, and they're created this basically an NPM package where you give it the details of Webflow, the site that you've built, and then it just automatically pulls all of those components into React app for you. So then you have a designer, myself or another designer, designing all those components and getting them perfect, changing things on the fly, and the developer, the React developer, who's plugging it into all the data and making it all work, pressing a button and getting those updates down the same way as you would get a GET request of that. The benefits I see of that is just that aspect of we're giving designers more control on what their design is interpreted with, while you're not breaking the workflow of the actual developer. There's a video of this, but I won't play it, so we can have a bit of a Q&A and I'll let you kind of go over it. But so with Evolving Web at the moment, we're pitching for another project at the moment. The organisation has Drupal, they have it all set up. We are going to be experimenting heavily once we win it. We're going to be experimenting really heavily to see where we can tap that workflow from my designers into Drupal, whether it be through something that's automated, or whether it's more an API driven, or whether it's more handing over code as designs rather than pictures of websites. But we are going to be trailblazing the Drupal integration with Webflow in the coming months. Any questions? Discussions? Should we all just go to the pub for my birthday? What's everybody's initial thoughts on these kind of like, you know, visual designers, visual coders? What's the kind of consensus or thoughts initially? None?
I try. In the past, many applications or tools try to convert all application in new applications. But the problem in this moment is the performance, and this application generates much code. Is very, in this moment, is hard for the developer because many code not useful. And in your experience about this example, is different, is the same, is more clean, or what do you think about it?
I think that's where the shift has changed, because I know exactly what you mean. It's like spaghetti code, you could never touch it, but with the right organisation, it's like you're looking at the inspector. So like, you know, if you name things properly and you do the hierarchy properly, that's the output of it. So you control the actual HTML and the CSS. I think in terms of performance, you know, like if you do any test of a site that's created in these, you know, they're always 99 in the Lightroom. Accessibility is a big thing as well. But also just that, you know, when you export the code, you can still use that as well. But I think that's where the turning point is. That's where it's like, it's not just working, but you can't touch it. It's working and then it's something that's usable in the future as you go forward. That's it. Thank you for all coming. I hope that was in some way interesting.